lifting up Jesus, opening his word from Australia, Denmark, Israel, Japan, New Zealand, Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland, Singapore, South Africa, United Kingdom, Thailand, the Philippines, United States, and throughout the world. You're watching Moriel TV. Hi, this is Tim from Moriel TV and Moriel Radio, here with James Jacob Prasch, live in England, and this is This Week in Prophecy.
Blessings in Jesus, dear friends, and welcome to This Week in Prophecy, and not for the first time, what a week it has been. This week we're going to begin looking at issues that concerning the church before moving on to broader world affairs and ultimately to Israel and the Middle East. But we'll begin with the church, specifically the harlot church, the apostate church. This Week in Prophecy, of all sources, the National Catholic Reporter has disclosed that the Vatican since 1950 has paid nearly $4 billion in assorted hush money and private compensation to the victims of pedophilia. The sources came from harvesting or data mining a number of resources, including LexisNexis, information from published news articles from a wide spectrum, from the Bishops' Accountability Organization, and from SNAP, from the network of those who've been molested by priests. David Cloughney of SNAP said there is nothing new from Pope Francis. It's just more of the same. They're not identifying the priests who did these things, not voluntarily. They are not even naming the specifics. They're simply saying we need to make sure it hasn't happened again and that we're sorry that it happened and so forth, but there's been nothing to resolve the situation. That has seen the transfer of known pedophile priests from one parish and one church to another, where they would continue their careers as professional child molesters, using a religious masquerade and camouflage to do so. Broken down, it would mean that every Roman Catholic diocese in the United States would have received $20 billion. That's $20 billion per diocese and archdiocese in the USA alone, if that $4 billion had not been paid to victims as hush money or as confidential non-disclosure settlement. Bishops' Accountability and also the SNAP network are charging the Roman Catholic bishops in the United States with politically and legally lobbying against statutes of limitations that will allow for the prosecution of priests for sex crimes against children committed when the children were still children. So we have a situation where children who are obviously humiliated and embarrassed, even afraid to tell their parents about the sexual assaults, who are confused, and who are afraid and intimidated because it is known to be common practice that the Roman Catholic priests and nuns told the children that if they divulged what the priest did to them, they would go to hell. In adult life, now the children turned adults are coming forward, but the Roman Catholic Church is lobbying to have that made impossible, saying the statute of limitations has been so long. They couldn't do it when they were children. They were afraid, they were humiliated, and they were intimidated. But now in adult life, they're coming forward, but the Roman Catholic Church wants to uphold the statute of limitations in their favor. This is beyond corrupt. This shows what a disgusting, revolting, false religious system the Church of Rome is. And if you are a Roman Catholic, if that's what you're a part of, you should be ashamed of yourself. Don't call yourself a Christian. You need to believe the real Jesus and repent. It is a disgrace. Oh, I don't agree with it. If somebody didn't agree with what the mafia does, they shouldn't be in the mafia. But even the mafia wouldn't do what the Roman Catholic Church has done to these children. and you're a part of that church. This is what you're paying money for? This is what you put money in the collection and the basket for? To hire lawyers to keep sex criminals out of prison and to pay hush money? And to pay political lobbyists so the priests can't be prosecuted? After they tell children they're going to go to hell if they tell anybody that they just got raped by a priest or molested by a nun? It is a house of shame, and you live in it. No, I'm not against Catholic people. But what does Jesus say? Not what I say. What does Jesus say about Rome and any other false religion? Come out of her, my people, lest you participate in her sins and share in her plagues. If you are in that church, you participate in her sins and you will share in her plagues. You will give account to Jesus Christ. We're talking about children. This is a shocking report, particularly coming from the source it did. And it again shows that Pope Francis is part of the solution, not part of the problem. If anything, the problem has become exasperated under Pope Francis, as we speak about in a separate broadcast.
Rita Milla was 18 when she was raped.
He pulled out a condom and he basically raped me. And then he just left me there on the bed.
Manny Vega was only 10.
Digital penetration, masturbation, oral copulation, fondling, taking nude pictures of me.
Esther Miller, 15.
I was afraid. I was petrified. If I don't challenge him, he won't knock my teeth out like my mom had her teeth knocked out.
3 innocent souls assaulted by members of the Catholic Church.
He would tell me things like, you know, you're so special that God has allowed me to be ordained so that I could teach you what pure love is.
Esther vividly remembers how the abuse began back in 1980 when Deacon Michael Nocita started writing her letters. On the night she was first assaulted, Esther's parents had invited the deacon to stay with them.
That's the first time that there was the physical touch, where he started kissing my tears, licking my neck. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, am I imagining this? Why is he touching me like this? Why is he caressing me and holding me and his hands are going down onto my breast?
And then when that happened,
and then there was
no limit.
No, it was in parking lots, at golf courses, Disneyland, hotels.
How did you end it?
Well, you know, they transferred him.
That's the modus operandi. Always transfer them and protect them. That's the feeling.
Correct.
The Archdiocese of Los Angeles released files that show church officials knew of Esther's encounters with Deacon Michael Nocita, who worked in local Catholic high schools. Former Archbishop Roger Mahoney's notes and initials appear on the files. Current Archbishop Jose Gomez publicly denounced Mahoney's mishandling of clergy sex abuse and relieved his predecessor of all public duties. Do you still consider yourself a victim?
I've moved from victimhood to survivor to thriver. And it took years.
After suffering in silence for 27 years, Esther now works to help other victims.
I'm committed to this cause, like till I die. Because if
till
I
you
can,
die.
Till I die.
That's really strong.
I thought I was alone. And there are other souls out there that are alone.
Souls like Manny Vega, who also suffered in silence.
I was an altar boy at Our Lady of Guadalupe in Oxnard. At the time, Father Fidencio Silva, who's a missionary of the Holy Spirit, had come. He was a new priest, very energetic.
It was 1979, and Manny was trying to escape a life on the streets. To be associated with the Catholic Church was a great thing for your family.
It was the norm. There was nothing else other than that. During that time that he came in, my parents were having marital difficulties. My heart was just broken apart. I was a young boy, and that's where he found the weakness.
They are experts in finding.
These men take that inside information and they twist it around, and they find vulnerability within the family and they exploit it.
Manny says he tolerated the abuse because he was caught up in the mystical spell of Father Fidencio and the church.
And so this progressed not only to me, but there was also other occasions where the abuse happened in group settings with other altar boys.
Rita Milla endured the pain alone as well.
I was abused as a teenager by one priest who later invited other priests. And eventually it ended up being 7 priests who abused me.
Your story was one of my first stories, and you had the courage back then to say things that many people take decades to say. Now, How did it go from being abused by one priest to being abused by 7 priests?
It was first just Father Tamayo. He got me used to the touching little by little. Later on, he started doing other things with his hands. He took me to a house where he had taken me before, and I thought it was going to be more of the same thing. And he brought another priest with him. And while the other priest was in the living room, Father Tamayo took me into the bedroom.
Rita was raped there by Father Tamayo. Afterwards, the second priest, Father Angel Cruces, came to the room and raped her also.
I went into the bathroom and I just wanted to flush myself down the toilet because I thought that's where I belonged.
So then after those 2 priests, another 5 came?
Yes. There were,
in different occasions?
Different occasions. There was one time that there were like 4 priests at the same time.
4 priests at the same time?
Yes, and then they would come in one by one, and it didn't stop until I became pregnant by one of them.
Rita was sent to the Philippines to give birth to her daughter.
Father Tamayo said, if anybody finds out that you're pregnant, they're gonna know it's one of us. So to protect the church, we have to hide you, you have to leave.
To protect the church, that's what he said.
Yes.
Not to protect you, to protect the church.
To protect the church. And I was so Catholic that I said, yes, we have to protect the church. For some reason, I thought that it had been my fault.
Would you have any interest in knowing if they're alive or not?
I would, because I wouldn't want them to be priests. I wouldn't want them to keep doing what they're doing.
Manny Vega joined the Marines when he was 16 to escape the torture. He was a scout sniper and was awarded the nation's highest peacetime award for heroism. Today, he's a retired police officer living in Oxnard, California. Is Father Fidencio alive?
He's still alive.
Where is he?
From what I understand, he's in Mexico. I want to give him the opportunity to sit with me, and we're going to talk it out like men. I want...
You still want to do that?
Oh, absolutely.
You want to confront him?
I want to do the Christian thing, the right thing. In other words, give him the opportunity to clear the slate so he can go to heaven.
And what would you want to tell him then?
Because I want to show him that I'm more of a man than he is. I took the abuse, I suffered the abuse, I suffered the abuse today.
Esther Miller can't forgive the man who still torments her. Have you been looking for him?
No. Mm-mm.
Because?
Because I think I would kill him.
Even now, Esther?
Even now, yeah.
The hatred is so deep.
The soul murder that he did to me is almost irreparable.
And Pope Francis has angered victims of clerical sex abuse with his comments. Not surprising. Jesuit Pope Francis has triggered anger in Chile after accusing victims of a pedophile priest of slander. Francis said there was no proof for their claims that abuse by Father Fernando Caradima had been covered up by another man, Bishop Juan Barros. This is not one single piece of proof against him.
Trabajando, compañero, no me... ¡No me apure ahí!
Luchando sin casa ni cagando, morir luchando sin casa ni cagando. ¡Cárcel a Javier Blanco! ¡Cárcel a Solano!
Bienvenido a Chile. Bienvenido al Parque O'Higgins.
Bienvenido a la iglesia de todos quienes lo recibimos.
President Trump of the United States faces a Schumer shutdown of the government, with the Democratic Party opposing a budgetary provision and a fiscal expenditures provision that it doesn't oppose, simply because the Trump administration refuses to tack on a DACA agreement on the terms of the minority Democratic Party. In other words, Mr. Schumer is saying, although we are the minority party and you are the majority party, unless you agree to a DACA provision on our terms, not on your terms, we are going to shut down the government, even though DACA is unrelated to the budgetary provisions that can hurt the military and hurt child health provisions. Not that Mr. Schumer seems to care about any of those things, nor does Ms. Pelosi. What is astounding is, in 2013, when the Republicans threatened to shut down the government and so acted against the spending of Barack Obama for legitimate reasons, Nancy Pelosi compared the Republicans to suicide bombers and fiscal terrorists.
Good morning. Here it is. The GOP tax scam, the GOP tax scam. It will unravel the ACA, its sneaky ACA repeal, sneaky ACA repeal. It's a lethal attack on the middle class, on Americans' jobs, good veterans. We need increased veterans spending. So it's not just an increase. Emergency disaster funding for Texas, Florida, Puerto Rico, and U.S. Virgin Islands, and wildfire, and then, of course, passing the DREAM Act, which has bipartisan support. And I repeat, they're saying this is a middle-income tax cut, 82 million middle-class families, judiciary, and HIPS, Intelligence Committee, the House Select Committee on Intelligence. We thought we were in a good place. Now we'll hear from some legal experts on the subject, because sometimes when you have knowledge, you have to make a judgment. And you can't make how can your judgment be respected if you don't even know what you're talking about?
Now they're doing the same things themselves with no reason, simply engaging in out-and-out political blackmail. If you don't make DACA provisions for children who were born into the United States illegally by parents illegally, on our terms, we're going to shut down the government. Now, Mr. Trump has not said he does not want any DACA provision for these children who are now in their 30s and 40s, most of them, and not all of them claiming to be DACA or DACA. He said, first, the wall must be built, because without the wall, anytime the United States has done anything suggesting amnesty, it has increased illegal immigration. Until the wall is built, there's no point. Secondly, we have to stop turning immigration into the United States into a lottery ticket, a lottery system. It must be merit-based. And thirdly, he said there can be no more chain visas given to families of people who entered the country illegally. These were his terms, generally agreed to by the Republican constituencies who voted for the Republican majorities in the Senate and the House. But Mr. Schumer is going to continue to threaten his government shutdown if he cannot have DACA on his terms. Remember, Mr. Trump has not said there'll be no help for DACA or no provision for DACA children who are no longer, by and large, children. He's not said this. He simply stated terms. So the minority party is trying to hold the majority party hostage, saying, if you don't do it on our terms, we're going to shut down the whole government, even though we don't agree with the fiscal provisions of the bill at hand. This is beyond hypocrisy. It's beyond corruption. But what does it really spell? It spells swamp politics. That's all. We've continually asked prayer for Mr. Trump, and we do so again this week. Courageously, Mr. Trump has been the first president to speak at a pro-life rally. He has been sticking up this week for medical professionals who were intimidated by the Obama administration with a "you must kill" policy. That objection on religious grounds to being party to things to do with human reproduction is not grounds not to participate in it as a medical professional. Mr. Trump has said freedom of conscience and freedom of faith and religious convictions, moral convictions concerning abortion, must remain paramount constitutionally against the murdering policies of the Obama administration and the Democratic Party, including supposedly pro-life Roman Catholics in the Democratic Party, such as Joe Biden and, of course, Nancy Pelosi. They follow in the footsteps of Kennedy. What they say on Sunday is different than what they say on Monday in the Congress. We had this false alarm in Hawaii of an imminent missile attack from North Korea. Supposedly, a state employee pushed the wrong button at the change of shifts. He's been removed. Scares like this are exactly what the North Korean regime is trying to invoke. But it is also invoking a more consolidated support for a more aggressive policy towards North Korea. Hawaii is arguably the most liberal state in the United States and the most anti-Trump state, although California and Massachusetts would come very close to it. It's interesting that this is the state, because of its geographical circumstances, that is being forced to recognize Mr. Trump's warnings concerning North Korea are indeed realistic as a strategic threat to the United States. Ludicrously, almost as an act of a failing celebrity, someone whose film career is obviously not A-listed anymore, it doesn't seem to be, we had Jamie Lee Curtis, the daughter of Tony Curtis, blaming Mr. Trump for the North Korean threat and for the false alarm. How she worked that out, I do not know, but she blamed Mr. Trump. Idiocy upon idiocy, Hollywood hypocrisy gone mad. But such it is, this week in prophecy. Please pray for President Trump as he continues to stand up for the pro-life position and for the rights of Christians and others in the medical profession who, by reason of moral conviction, cannot be party to non-therapeutic abortion. Let us press on. This week in prophecy. In Bolivia, which has a left-wing government akin to the Chavez regime in Venezuela, although it is a floundering government, have announced a new law. This new law is Penal Code 88.11. It says that recruiting to armed conflict or religious worship is a crime sentenciable by up to 12 years in imprisonment. It is actually equating evangelism, preaching the gospel, with recruiting terrorists, inciting people to armed conflict. The basis for it, who knows the basis and the thinking of the left? But it is happening in Bolivia, a country where many have turned to Christ out of Roman Catholicism. Please pray for the body of Christ in Bolivia and that this law will.
Well, President Evo Morales of Bolivia says he's breaking relations with Israel over its invasion of the Gaza Strip. Morales says he will ask the International Criminal Court to bring genocide charges against top Israeli officials. The move by the Bolivian president closely follows the actions of Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez, who last week broke ties with Israel. Morales told the country's diplomatic corps that the Israeli attacks on Gaza seriously threaten world peace. And he wants Mr. Ehud Olmert and his cabinet to face criminal charges. Morales chided the UN, ridiculing the Security Council as Insecurity Council for its lukewarm response to the Gaza crisis. He said the UN General Assembly should condemn the invasion. He also said Israeli President Shimon Peres should be stripped of his Nobel Peace Prize for failing to stop the invasion.
The government of Austria has come under criticism from church groups after it was disclosed that nearly 1,000 Christian converts out of Islam are being questioned by the Austrian government with technically complicated theological and religious questions, such as who was the first ordained female clergyman in the National Protestant Church of Austria. Things that no new convert out of Islam who doesn't even speak German could possibly know or answer. It seems like a contrived and orchestrated attempt to discriminate against Christians saved out of Islam. Can you imagine what would happen if such policies were enacted against Christians who converted to Islam? They would be screaming anti-Islamic discrimination. But it's happening this week in prophecy. This week in prophecy, complications have emerged concerning the relocation of the American embassy to Jerusalem in terms of the time frame. After Benjamin Netanyahu said it could happen rather quickly, Mr. Trump said it could not happen within a year. The reasons for this appear to be, or maybe, or would seem to be, that the existing facility in West Jerusalem, near Independence Park, would not be large enough to host the full embassy apparatus and function being shifted from Tel Aviv, and it will take a longer time to construct a new embassy. Mr. Trump seems to disfavor having a temporary embassy in Jerusalem, only to have to relocate it to a newer building with more expanded premises at a later point. Nonetheless, much ado has been made about it in certain quarters of the press.
Some members of the United Nations Security Council are now calling for an urgent meeting to address President Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Joining us now, the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley. Ambassador, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Wolf.
So why make this announcement today?
Well, this has been 22 years in the making. If you go back and see that Congress actually passed the Jerusalem Embassy Act back in 1995, both parties, both sides of the aisle have come together. This is something that unites our country, and the fact that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, no one doubts that. Their parliament's there, their Supreme Court's there, their prime minister is there, and the United States has always put embassies in the capital. And so if you look at that, this is just common sense. This is just reality. What has happened in the past is every time presidents wanted to do this move, because every single leading presidential candidate has always said they're for moving the embassy. But every time that was presented to them, you had a lot of naysayers saying why it shouldn't happen. And they all said that it was going to hurt the peace process. Well, in 22 years, we haven't seen a peace process. Maybe if we do something different, we will now start to see something move forward. And so I think that's what the president did, is he showed courage, but more than that, he showed a commitment towards a peace process to go forward.
Does the Trump administration now consider, Ambassador, East Jerusalem as part of Israel?
If you notice, we didn't say anything about any part of Jerusalem. That's for the two sides to decide. That's not for the United States to decide. All we said was Jerusalem as a whole. In the peace process, however they decide to break it up or not break it up or decide east and west, that's between the two parties. And we're going to let them do that, and we're going to support them in that process.
Well, specifically, does the Trump administration now consider the old city of Jerusalem part of Israel?
You know, what they've said is Jerusalem is the capital. We are not going to weigh in anymore on that out of our commitment for the peace process. We don't want to pick a side on this. What we want to say is it is time, for the sake of Israeli children and Palestinian children, it is time for those two sides to come together. It's time for them to negotiate, and the United States is pushing that process. They get to decide the details. It's not for us to decide.
Well, if the U.S. moves the embassy to Jerusalem, I assume it'll be West Jerusalem. Does the U.S. government now differentiate between West and East Jerusalem?
You know, you're making an assumption on where it's going to go, and we just started that relocation process, so that's not something that we need to talk about. What we are talking about is the fact that this is a great way of moving things forward. For 22 years, we've seen everything be stale. The president finally said, let's get it done, and it's one more promise to the American public that he said he was going to do. 6 months ago, the Senate overwhelmingly on both sides said they wanted him to do it, and he's following through on the will of the American people. And I think that everyone will respect that. They understand that the United States is going to put their embassy in the capital. Why should Israel be any different than any other country in the world? And so that's what we did today. This is just a reality check. This is nothing that anybody didn't already know.
But it is significant, Ambassador, that you're not willing to say the old city of Jerusalem or East Jerusalem is part of Israel. You say that's still open to negotiation. Is that what I'm hearing?
Wolf, why would the United States say that? When we're pushing a peace process, that's really for the Palestinians and the Israelis to decide. If we decided that, we would be picking a side. There has been a lot of time and effort that's been put in by the administration to talk to both sides to bring them to the table. The last thing we're going to do is pick what we think should happen, because at the end of the day, Palestinians and Israelis need to live together and live in the situation that they settle together. This is not something the United States wants to do. We are fulfilling to the American public what we said we would do, and we're moving something forward that hasn't been done in 22 years. And this is about results, and this is about courage. And I'll remind you that when President Reagan made that famous speech that said, Mr. Gorbachev, bring down this wall, all of the people around him told him it was a bad idea. Sometimes you have to take risks. Courage leads to leadership. Leadership leads to peace. And we have to go with the truth on it.
You say, Ambassador, you want the peace process to move forward. Now, the Palestinian chief negotiator, Saeb Erekat, says the U.S. can no longer play any role in the peace process. And he said, I'm quoting him now, President Trump just destroyed any policy of a two-state solution. Your reaction?
Anytime we make a decision, we get positive and negative reactions. That's going to happen. At the end of the day, the Palestinians, they need to make sure that we stop violence, we stop any sort of issues on both sides, Israelis and the Palestinians, and think about Palestinian children who want to know where their home is. Think about Israeli children who want to know where their home is. The peace process is not going to stop its negotiations. They are too far down the road to just break the process there. Palestinians want peace just as much as Israelis want peace. They are going to do this because tensions run high. That was expected, but it will pass. And when it passes, I hope that we can find peace and stability in that region of the world.
Does the announcement today by the president give tacit permission to the Israeli government to continue building in East Jerusalem? Some call it settlements in East Jerusalem. Where do you stand on that?
The U.S. was not talking about in any way settlements or anything else. This is just talking about the embassy being in the capital of Israel. That's all that this was talking about. We have long said that settlements are not a good idea. The Israelis are they're very familiar with us telling them that we don't think it's a good idea, especially when we're moving through this peace process. We're going to continue to say that.
The president also signed that waiver today that keeps the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv. Every 6 months, every president going back to 1995, they've signed that waiver not to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, citing national security concerns. When the next deadline comes up in 6 months, will the president sign it again?
If the embassy is built, the president won't need to sign it. If the embassy is not built, he will need to sign the waiver. The waiver says that you have to, when you declare that site, it has to be up and running at that time. So we have to, obviously a lot has to go into the plans, the architecture, the building, the construction side of it. When that happens, the president will gladly not sign the waiver anymore.
The Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, who we're told opposed this decision, Secretary Mattis at the Defense Department apparently opposed it as well, Mike Pompeo at the CIA. That's what we're hearing. He didn't play much of a role in this critically important, very important historic announcement today. Why?
Who didn't play a role?
Rex Tillerson.
Well, he's in Europe, from what I understand, so that would be the case. But look, when the National Security Council comes together, everyone puts their opinion on the table. Everyone puts their views. The president's great at listening to everyone. And at the end of the day, he makes a decision. All of those advisors told President Reagan the same thing, that he shouldn't do it. At the end of the day, President Reagan made a decision. Today, President Trump made a decision. Now we need to move forward on that decision and hope that we can finally bring peace to that region of the world.
But in rejecting the recommendation, the advice of the Secretary of State, and you've heard all those reports, Ambassador, is this another sign that he may be on his way out?
No, I think what you're looking at is this is a president that doesn't want status quo. He looks at history, and if nothing has changed, he's not going to repeat the same decisions other presidents have made when you don't get a good solution out of it. So I think this is about a president who had the courage to say, you know what, we're going to try something different. He had the courage to say, I'm going to listen to the will of the American people, and he's moving the ball on that. And we're seeing the Palestinians and the Israelis come together to finally talk about a peace process. Let's hope that that happens.
Let me ask you one final question, because I know you got to run. The 1995 Jerusalem Embassy Act passed the Senate 93-5. It passed the House of Representatives 374-37, overwhelmingly calling on the U.S. to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital and move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, with that 6-month waiver provision included. The Russia sanctions bill that President Trump signed into law in August passed the Senate 98-2, passed the House of Representatives 419-3. Why haven't those sanctions been implemented?
I know that the State Department was moving forward on those sanctions, and from what I've heard, it is supposed to be in the process, so I haven't heard that those sanctions haven't moved forward. I know there was a delay initially, but as far as I know, those sanctions are going to be in place, and they're warranted.
They were passed overwhelmingly. We're told they have not yet been implemented. The delay keeps going on and on. We know the president strongly opposed that legislation. He reluctantly signed it into law because he knew he would not be able to override a veto. If he vetoed it, it wouldn't be overridden. Do you not know, Ambassador, whether or not those sanctions have actually been implemented?
You know, when I talked to, the last I heard from Secretary Tillerson, he said that they had finished what they needed to and they were going to be implemented. So obviously that's a question for Secretary Tillerson. I can tell you the president knows those have gone into effect. He supports it. He signed it. And so now we're moving forward. And we all know why those sanctions went into effect. It was clear that Russia needed to feel the impact of those. And I think that's going forward.
And do you support implementing those sanctions against Russia because of what it has done?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, I'll leave it on that note. Ambassador Nikki Haley, was kind of you to join us. Thanks very much on this very important day.
Okay, thank you, Wolf.
Lots to discuss with Thomas Friedman, the veteran journalist, author, and foreign affairs columnist for the New York Times and the author of the best-selling book. Thank you for being late, now out in paperback. Thanks, Tom, very much for joining us. In your new column, just posted at the New York Times, you write this: in nearly 30 years of covering United States foreign policy, I've never seen a president give up so much to so many for so little. Explain what you mean.
Well, it's very simple, Wolf. The question of the U.S. Embassy's location in Israel, whether we should move it from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, has been the most sensitive real estate issue, basically, in American foreign policy for almost 70 years. Now, for us to give that away, to basically move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and recognize that as Israel's capital, personally, I'm not against that in the right context. I'm not even against it now, Wolf, if we got something in return for it. What could we have gotten in return? Bibi Netanyahu wanted this desperately. He's in trouble politically at home. Trump could have come to him and said, Bibi, you want the embassy moved? That's really important for you. Here's what I want. I want you to announce a ban on any more settlements beyond the settlement blocks in the West Bank for two reasons. One, that will preserve the possibility of a two-state solution at maximum, and at a minimum, it'll preserve the possibility of separation between Israelis and Palestinians, so we won't have Israeli settlers living in densely populated Arab areas. Had Trump done that, had he done a deal, the art of the deal, not the art of the giveaway, here's what we would be in so much better situation. By the way, Palestinians then would have said, that's a fair trade-off. Arabs would have said, that's a fair trade-off. And Bibi even could have gone to his cabinet and said, look, I had to do this, but look what I got in return. Instead, Trump gave away one of the crown jewels of American foreign policy for free, probably for a sugar high to get this guy in Alabama elected, and to pay off, campaign donors and promises. That is pathetic, Wolf.
So you think he did it for political reasons?
Oh my gosh!
This could have been a bargaining chip.
He could have used this as a strategic bargaining chip. This is a guy who came into office saying everybody made bad deals. This deal, Wolf, this isn't a bad deal. This was no deal. He just gave this property away when he could have traded it for something that would have advanced the peace process and advanced the U.S. national interest, not the interest of his base, not the interest of his donors, not the interest of a senator in an evangelical state who wants to get elected. I'm talking about the U.S. national interest was completely abandoned here.
So does it end the possibility of what we call a two-state solution, Israel and a new state of Palestine next door?
I would never say it ends it. Who knows, what will come. Trump won't be president forever, and ultimately what matters what Israelis and Palestinians decide. But we had a grand opportunity to actually advance the peace process, to do something that would have been good for Israel, good for our Arab allies, and most of all, good for the American national interest. And Donald Trump gave it away for free.
Does it encourage the Israeli government to go ahead and build more settlements in controversial areas, including in East Jerusalem?
They're going to build in East Jerusalem. That's not going to stop. To me, Wolf, the issue is this, and you and I have covered this for so long. The chances of a two-state solution are shrinking all the time. The Palestinians already understand that about 5% of the West Bank is already going to go to Israel. That's where the vast majority of settlements are. What's at issue is Israel keeps going beyond that 5% and settling in more and more densely populated Palestinian areas. Once that gets far enough, the possibility of a two-state solution will be impossible. What's even worse, Wolf, if you care about Israel and the future of the Jewish state, any separation between Israelis and Palestinians will be possible. The president had a chance to use this issue of Jerusalem to leverage something really important. By the way, had he done it, Wolf, he could say, Barack Obama tried to do that for 8 years. He didn't get it, and I got it. Look, I satisfied the promise to move the embassy to Jerusalem, and I got a promise from Israelis to stop settling beyond the blocks. That would have been a political achievement, and it would have been a great achievement for the American national interest.
We were told that he was advised against this move by his top foreign policy and national security advisors, including the Secretary of State Tillerson, the Secretary of Defense Mattis, the CIA Director Mike Pompeo, but he still went ahead and did this. Why do you think he did this? I mean, if your national security advisors are telling you, you know what, do this down the road. I know you made a campaign commitment to do this. Don't do it now. It's only going to cause aggravation and potentially endanger Americans at various embassies.
I can't explain it other than raw, naked politics or sheer abject ignorance.
That's it. Tom Friedman from the New York Times, thanks very much for joining us.
We will move the American embassy to the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Jerusalem.
And the crowd roared. But would it happen? If he became president, would President Trump actually do this?
Presidents before have said it. President looks like he's going to do it.
I know. He's saying he's going to do it today at 1 o'clock. I think that makes Ben Shapiro pretty happy. He's the editor-in-chief of the Daily Wire, syndicated columnist and host of the Ben Shapiro Show. Ben, what are your thoughts? When did you hear that he was going to do this?
Oh, I had heard actually sort of off the radar last week, and I'd kept it under wraps. I was pretty excited about that. It's obviously an act of not only political bravery, but moral courage to move the embassy, but just to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. The absurdity of the U.S. policy suggesting that Jerusalem was not Israel's capital has resulted in idiocies like the fact that my niece, who was born in Jerusalem, it says on her passport Jerusalem, and then it doesn't say which country she's from. Jerusalem is only important to the world because of Judaism. It's important to Christianity because it was first important to Judaism. It's important to Islam because it was first important to Judaism. Jerusalem is mentioned hundreds of times in the Jewish text. Jerusalem is in the Israeli national anthem. The culmination of Jewish history really was in 1967 with the recapture and the unification of Jerusalem under Judaic rule. The freedom of Jerusalem was only assured, by the way, because of that Jewish rule. What President Trump is doing is not just a recognition of reality, it's also an act of political usefulness, because all of the negotiations that have been happening for the last 20 years, for most of my lifetime, all of those negotiations have been preconditioned on stupidity, that Israel was going to give up its eternal capital, which is insane. I mean, in order to understand how dumb that is, you have to think that for Israel, Jerusalem is about 1,000 times more important than Washington, D.C. is to the United States. I mean, the founders put Washington, D.C. on a swamp because they just wanted it to be not part of any state. The reason that Jerusalem is where it is because the Bible says it is where it is. There's a religious adherence to Jerusalem that doesn't exist for normal capitals around the world. And for President Trump to recognize that this isn't going anywhere, that the freedom of Israel is just inherently connected with the freedom of Jerusalem, and that any negotiations that are to take place are going to have to be done by the Israelis themselves, and the Israelis are going to have to make decisions about what to do with their capital. Well, it's a ground shift, and it's a recognition of a reality that's necessary in order for real peace to be achieved in the region, not based on false stupidities that have been promulgated for the last couple of decades.
So they have 6 months to actually do it. They have a 6-month waiver to actually do it. Monday was the deadline to actually make the announcement. So today, we're going to get it today officially at 1 o'clock. But it will remain a divided city. That won't change. Does that bother you?
Well, I mean, it will remain a divided city because the fact is that the authorities have basically allowed terrorism to spread among the Palestinians, and East Jerusalem has largely been occupied by the same people it's been occupied for the last 7 decades, namely Muslims who live there. That part of the city is very dangerous. It's been very dangerous ever since I can remember, long before I was born. The fact is that when I visited Israel for the first time when I was 16 years old, Israeli soldiers had to guard us as we came out of the tunnels under the Western Wall into East Jerusalem, which, again, the capital of Israel. If you are a Jew and you walk into East Jerusalem, your life is in danger. If you're an Arab and you walk into West Jerusalem, there's no problem at all, which signifies exactly why Jerusalem should be under Jewish control and not under Muslim control.
Hi there, my name is Hanania. Today I'm in Tel Aviv, and we're gonna find out what the Israelis think about Donald Trump. Let's go.
I think he's a weird guy, but I think it's a good. There is a good opportunity now, to change things, to make things different and try to, I don't know, to find different way than what we have until now.
It's not very good, but I think it's better than Hillary.
בכנות, אני לא מכירה כל כך את דונלד טראמפ. שמעתי עליו כמה דברים. אישית אני חושבת שיש כמה צדדים טובים לזה שהוא נבחר להיות נשיא ארצות הברית, שהוא כן יכול לתרום הרבה דברים לישראל. לפעמים יש פעמים שאני חושבת שזה לא כל כך טוב, שהוא סתם דיבורים, כדי להישמע טוב בעיני האומה, אבל יכול להיות שהוא יתרום הרבה.
I don't know him that well, but I did heard that he is gonna be good for Israel.
Nobody can do it.
Nobody can do it?
This is the wall. Too many people get benefits from these walls.
Nobody can do that.
No one?
But we wish for it.
Maybe, but it will be very aggressive way. He will have aggressive way to do it.
Who knows, right? Absolutely no idea. We're pretty much, I think, pretty shocked that he actually won. Overall, I mean, I think he thinks, he appreciates Israel and stuff, but who knows what he's capable of and how weird it's gonna be.
They are really strong people and they have their opinion, and I think it can work together. I think Trump will try to make some things that Israel don't like, but it can work together.
A dreamer.
And what about you?
Phenomena.
Business.
The first thing I had is weird.
Crazy. Crazy.
Unpredictable.
Very good.
Coming closer now, as always, to the Middle East. A Christian who returned home a year after the pogroms against Christians in El Arish in the northern Sinai was shot dead. This ongoing policy, assassination of Christians by Muslims, that is underreported or just unreported, is shocking and disgraceful. Somehow, Muslims, radical Muslims, Hamas, are always portrayed as the victims in Gaza. They are not the victims. The true victims of injustice in the Middle East are Arab Christians. And as always, we thank God Israel is one country that has protected the human rights and religious freedom of Arab Christians. This week in prophecy, this Christian who was shot at El Arish, his name was Bassam Hadez. He was only 27 years old. May God bless him. But may God also bless President Assisi in Egypt. He's again shown favor to the broader Christian community, including to the Copts, some of whom are born again. Mr. Assisi's government has allowed for legal provision for Christian groups to meet, to worship, and to pray in unlicensed buildings. Now, under Islamic governments, it was very difficult for Christians to even obtain licenses. This is a case where God is using an unsaved political leader, much the same as with Mr. Trump. Now, of course, we pray for the salvation of General President Assisi and President Trump. But as it says in Daniel, the Lord establishes kings and removes them. And as Paul tells us in Timothy, that we are to pray for those in authority that we may lead peaceable lives. Thank God for the actions of General Assisi. Please keep him in prayer as well and pray for his salvation. Let us move on. This week in prophecy. There are unconfirmed reports, but reports that probably have some validity, that it has been suggested either by the United States or the Israelis or both that a Palestinian Muslim capital can be established in the outskirts of Jerusalem at a place called Abu Dis. Abu Dis is outside of the city line, as it were, outside of the demarcation line of the United City of Jerusalem. That is the reunited city of Jerusalem. Abu Dis is south by southwest of the large Israeli suburb of Jerusalem, Ma'ale Adumim. But it is almost directly on the city line, on the border, to the immediate east of southeast Jerusalem and to the northeast of Bethlehem. It is the site of Al-Quds University. Now, Al-Quds is the Arabic term for Jerusalem. The term Jerusalem never appears anywhere in the Quran, but the term Al-Quds does. Some later Islamic scholars identified Al-Quds as Jerusalem, but the historicity of Islamic claims to Jerusalem on any religious grounds is disputed. It has been disputed even by Islamic scholars themselves. The Al-Quds University, however, is in Abu Dis. It is in an exclusive Arab, largely Muslim area adjacent to the university, near Ma'ale Adumim, on the outskirts of Jerusalem and outside of the official city limits. It'll be interesting to see what materializes. This week, however, something interesting has also happened. We have seen Mr. Abbas at his antics once again, claiming that Jerusalem is our capital and it is the key to peace. A Palestinian Jerusalem as our capital is the key to peace. Otherwise, he says, it will be the key to war. It'll be the key to war. If this does not sound like Zechariah chapter 12, I don't know what does. He's a man who always speaks out of both sides of his mouth. We can't bank on what he says, but we do know what Scripture says this week in prophecy. Let us press on looking further. In 1840, the majority of Jerusalem, in 1840, in the 19th century, before the American Civil War, in 1840, the demographic majority under Turkish rule of Jerusalem was Jewish. The Peel Commission, the British Peel Commission, after the First World War, offered a two-state solution. And Jordan was the second state. Saddam Hussein stated, there are no such things as Palestinian people. Now, Yasser Arafat is reported to be related to the Husseini family. But Hajj Husseini said, there's no such thing as a Palestinian people. We do just not want a Jewish state. Something he said in 1937. Bearing in mind, the Husseini family, the Mufti of Jerusalem, were supporters of Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich against the British and against the French. In 1967, the response to an offered two-state solution was no, no, no. No to negotiations, no to recognition of Israel, and no to peace. This was a declaration by most of the Arab Muslim states in the world in 1967. In 2001, a left-wing Israeli Prime Minister, Rosh HaMemshalah, Ehud Barak, offered to return the entire West Bank except for 3%, and offered them at a comparable 3% of Israeli territory with a capital in East Jerusalem and a compromise on Jerusalem. Yasser Arafat responded by declaring jihad and turning it down, by bombing school buses and attacking bus stops with children on their way to school. It continues. In 2008, a similar offer was reiterated, but it was absolutely rejected. Why is it that the mainstream media, the European left, or no one else speaks of the fact that there were repeated offers of two-state solutions, of Israeli withdrawals from the West Bank as they withdrew from Gaza in exchange for peace, a compromise on Jerusalem with the capital in Jerusalem for both peoples? But all was rejected, responding with jihad. Radical Islam does not want peace. It wants jihad. When they say peace, they mean hudna, a temporary ceasefire until they can get the strategic advantage to continue the jihad, just as they've done in Gaza and in South Lebanon. This week in prophecy, Mr. Abbas is at it again. The same old tiring, boring game. But very few in the mainstream media tell the truth about it. This week in prophecy, the Chief Executive Officer, Managing Director of the Kingdom Fund of Saudi Arabia, Prince Al-Adwid bin Saud, and 60 other prisoners were transferred from the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Riyadh to proper prisons in Saudi Arabia. This was one of the most powerful men in the world. He's a major shareholder in CNN and in Fox News. Now he's under arrest and transferred to a proper jail. He had been kept incarcerated under more benevolent conditions in the Ritz-Carlton. That is over. We continue to pray for the crackdown in Saudi Arabia. For years, we've been asking people to pray against the Wahhab, against the Salafists, against the extreme Muslims in Saudi Arabia who run the Saudi legal and political system, and against the members of the House of Saud who fund them. This news is good this week in prophecy. Moving on to our main news this week in prophecy. It began only today. Turkey has shelled the Aldrin area of the Turkish-Syrian border. It is yet to send troops into the Syrian, take it over. Our main news this week concerns Turkey's attack on the Kurds in northern Iraq. This very day, Turkey announced that it shelled the Al-Reen region of This very day, Turkey has announced that it has shelled with artillery the Al-Reen region on the Iraqi side of the border with Syria, attacking the Kurds. It is doing so as the Trump administration seems to be modifying its policy and backing a 30,000-man Kurdish militia inside of Iraq, which Turkey fears is aligned with the YPG militia of Kurdish nationalists inside Turkey. This juxtaposes Turkey in direct conflict with the present policies of the Trump administration. We agree with Mr. Trump's support of the Iraqi Kurds. We think that these Kurds are the only people, as we've said repeatedly, in northern Iraq who can be trusted. Other Iraqis cannot be trusted, certainly not the Sunnis or Shias. But the Turks have their own agenda. The Kurds, who are the descendants of the ancient Medes, remain a persecuted and oppressed people, both in Iraq, where Saddam Hussein killed between 4,000 and 5,000 civilians, many of them children at Halabja, with gas weapons, and also in Turkey, where there's a history of them being an underclass in a land that was once their own. The Turks have done to the Kurds what they've done to other groups such as the Armenians. Yet, of course, they are revisionists and they deny it. This week in prophecy, however, things are really taking shape. In a conflict between the land of the Hittites and the land of the Medes, only this time the United States and its allies are implicated in it both strategically and diplomatically. Watch this space. We've been warning about this festering for some time. Turkey has begun attacking the Kurds in Iraq this very day.
The relationship between the United States and its NATO ally Turkey may be stretching beyond repair, and Washington's backing of what they call a border force of fighters in Syria and Iraq along Turkey's southern frontier is providing another strain. It's planned to be 30,000 strong and will protect territory seized by Kurdish forces in Syria. Now, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan says he's going to, quote, strangle it before it's even born.
The country that we call our ally insists on forming a terror army along our border, despite all our objections, warnings, and well-meant advice. Do you think a terrorist organization formed along the Turkish border has a target other than Turkey?
Washington's support of the Kurds has been a major point of conflict with Turkey since the intervention began in 2014. They're the backbone of U.S. efforts there, but viewed by Erdogan as closely tied to Kurdish separatists within his own borders. And Russia, which has grown closer to Turkey while still backing the opposite side in the civil war, has called the border force plans a plot to dismember Syria and place part of it under American control. Washington says it intends to use the border force as a peacekeeping mechanism to keep Islamic State's remnants from returning to the area. But Turkish-backed fighters have been known to clash with the Kurdish forces. American support of the Kurds, including embedding U.S. forces among its fighters, has only enraged Erdogan's government further. Syria's President Bashar al-Assad says his troops will crush the border force and drive it from the country.
That is what is taking place this week in prophecy. Thank you for listening. I'm Prasch. God bless.